and welcome to the Misbehavior Podcast for college student conduct professionals. I'm Colette,
And I'm Kurt.
and we have
Hi, Erin Kaplan, she, her pronouns, guest on the podcast.
Erin. You have been on our list of people we wanted to talk to the whole time because you inspired, I know, me to even want to do a podcast. So why don't you introduce yourself to the world and let folks know what you would want them to know about you, and then we are just going to see where the conversation takes us.
Sure, good question, big question. I am a fellow student conduct practitioner, and I have been doing this work. I joke that I've been doing it since I came out of the womb, but Kurt, I appreciated when you said you had been doing it since college ended, because me too. So I've been doing this work since 2013. I knew one of the co-hosts previous to today, Colette, who I know through ASCA, but just as it relates to this podcast and maybe our audience, I had been an ASCA member since 2013, but I was like on the outskirts, the shadows, standing in the back of the room, etc. Like I was very involved in ASCA New Jersey and one of the communities of practice, but I did not go to the annual conference. And anyway, in 2020, it was in DC by me, so I had no more excuses and I had to go. And I ended up presenting, and it's my first time at the ASCA annual conference, and I'm presenting, and I'm nervous, and I'm given the last slot of the day, and half the people are already on their planes. So 6 or 7 people came into the room of my session, mainly people I was friends with, and Colette, and that's how I met Colette. So February 2020 in DC, the presentation was on programming at small schools with limited resources. And Colette came, and since then, we have been very involved together with ASCA Pennsylvania, ASCA Philly, a couple of the communities of practice. We've done the Gearing Academy together. So I just want to say this field is so great because when I didn't know if I believed in me and there would have only been 6 bodies in that room, Colette was the seventh. And so this is just really full circle because she supported that presentation, and I'm so happy to be supporting this great podcast.
Some people might say that that was the most important thing that happened in 2020.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Same.
That is a great meet cute. I love it.
Was.
Kurt's known me for many decades, a couple
Yes.
decades at least, so he knows that I would not get up at 8 a.m. for just anybody.
No, no, she might get in at 8 a.m., but not. And Colette and I have been in student affairs since the 1900s, as the child in my house says. So, yeah.
I heard that on the last podcast episode, and I was like, wait, did he say it wrong or did I understand wrong? And then I was like, that's a joke. That's funny. I like it.
And now I've told it twice and I didn't even remember. That's how old I am.
I understand.
Kurt's little sound bites are the key to any sort of social media success I'm having right now with misbehavior.
Well, I would like to say Colette has great sound bites. Something we've talked about is how sanctions are for people, not policies.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I like
That's
There's
that.
some
a
other good lines you
Shawism.
and I have said. Yeah, yeah.
My most recent is a rule is not a reason. I hate reading reports where somebody has told the student, like, you're not allowed to do this, and the student has a very thoughtful, logical reason why they're doing the behavior, and the person just responds, but it's not the rule. And
Hmm.
Erin and I
No, I
came up
love
with
that.
the rule is not the reason.
Yes, I love that. And to even elaborate on that further, we're not a court of law. We're not in, a profession that is necessarily scientific. Not only is it a disservice to students to not educate them on why something is a problem, but it's so unimaginative to code things as policy violations and not policy violations because lots of things are policy violations, but there should be as many teachable moments and formal processes as, alternative resolutions and low-level, educational dialogues, deanly moments, whatever your campus calls them. So I love your point, Colette, because if it's just, well, this is a rule and that's why, I mean, that's not the way you talk to people that you're in community with. That's so not collaborative and not imaginative.
I think we have our first sound bite for this one.
I love it. But I have to ask, what is a deanly moment?
Where I did my graduate work, they called it a deanly moment, which was if a student needed to be called in to talk about behavior that wasn't amazing, but was not necessarily a policy violation. It was called a Deanly moment. All the schools I've been at since then, like I track it as such as an educational dialogue or educational dialogue / policy clarification meeting. And to clarify, no pun intended on the word, every conduct meeting that I have does involve a degree of educational dialogue and policy clarification, but this is one of the alternative resolutions that I introduced at my current institution. But it's really plainly put, as Colette would say, as you would say on this podcast, we are all human. Part of the humanity or part of the shared experience in that is, and especially Kurt, something you said really stuck out to me on one of the last podcasts. You were saying how a lot of students have conduct their first week at college and how it's something they'll never do again. And I said out loud in my car, and something they've never done before either.
Yeah.
So, I texted Colette and I said, now I'm thinking, is being a freshman a mitigating factor compared to being a senior? And I don't have an answer on that. But, to put the humanity into the process is to not be so unimaginative that when we look at our maxient pending reports, policy violation or not policy violation, because there are things that aren't policy violations that you have the right to do that may have hurt people you're in community with. And we have an opportunity to educate people on our expectations and our values, even if it's not a policy violation.
I love that you said something that they haven't done before. And it goes back to me to that sense of belonging that first year students really are probably looking for when they come to college. I mean, I remember showing up, you don't know anybody in the world and you just want to fit in. You might go along with something that you've never done before. And I also love policy clarification meeting because it doesn't presume bad intent. Maybe they just didn't know or they didn't understand the policy. So very cool.
Thank you. I'm proud of it. We piloted several alternative resolutions today's the 18-month mark of my job, which I meant to tell my supervisor when I just left his office. But I was just writing in a year-end report about last year about how we piloted several different alternative resolutions, which it is not RJ. We are RJ light, I say. I think one day, in the next couple of years, I definitely think we'll have RJ. And I loved the conversation you had with, I think their name was Cheney, about the direction that's all going. And I loved what Colette said about, the book and, of course, the book, everything. But we were a small campus with small staff, so we don't have an RJ process yet. There's lots of people who have joined the team in recent years who are very interested in this. But as sort of like an on-ramp on, I piloted with the support of my supervisor as well as my team, numerous alternative resolution pathways to resolution in the last year or so. So there's really like 3. Alcohol and drug amnesty, medical amnesty process. It's more than a letter. And it's a meeting, but it's not just a meeting, so I call it a process. And then policy clarification letters, and then policy clarification meetings. So is it helpful if I give a few examples of what those are?
Yes. And then I had a thought earlier this week, and you would be somebody, Erin, I'd usually call about this. I have started to hate warning notice letters.
So these are a reimagined warning letter.
Yeah.
So
I'd
like
love
good.
to hear.
Yeah. When I got to this institution, although I said this at my last one as well, I said, we're meeting with students about first-time violations of the prohibited item policy, like candles. I'm like, that's a lot of time from staff and from students. And to be clear, I believe, maybe an unpopular opinion, but I believe there's a difference between possession of a candle and having the candle lit. So basically, I created an alternative resolution process called First Time Prohibited Item Policy. It is limited to students who it's their first time. There's not an active policy violation going on. It's not lit, and the item cannot be illegal. Because if it's an illegal item, as we know, there's compliance things we need to do.
Right.
So this is candles, AC units, space heaters, that type of thing. And the policy clarification letter, I don't know that it is the word warning in it, to Colette's point, but it says it's actually sent by the area coordinator. So it says, I'm your AC. This was reported. It has been removed. This is how you get it back. It's not illegal. They can get it back. But if you get it back, it goes to the car or home or, whatever the plan is.
Right.
Here's a link to the prohibited items policy so you can learn more. You should know that future violations of this policy may be referred to the conduct process, but this is not considered a finding of responsible or a record. And then, of course, I think it's important even in those to say, if you like essentially offering an appeal process, if you believe there's a misunderstanding, let us know. So I've been using policy clarification letters for first time concerns about prohibited items, first time concerns about quiet hours, if there's no other accompanying violations. As the three of us know, sometimes when it's loud, it's because there's alcohol or whatever. But if it's simply just loud, this letter, and it says so and so, RA, public safety, whoever, came to your door, let you know it was loud. It was reported back to me that you fully complied with what they asked of you and you lowered the volume and no other identified violations were present. So I want to thank you for complying and let you know that this is not being referred to conduct. But as you all know, especially when working closely with live-in professionals, you may have live-in professionals or RAs or students who say, but this room is always loud and they always this. And I want to be able to say, that may be so. Did we ever say anything to them about it? So this sort of memorializes within Maxient that something was said to them, but the way I have the notes and tracking is it says not reportable in every place, and it's not going to be reportable. If students are in our campus woods without a permit, a lot of freshmen, they don't realize you need a permit. As long as they weren't found with alcohol there, they get this first time letter, and it says, here's how to reserve doing a bonfire in the woods. Things that are more elevated than that should require a conversation, such as trying to run an unauthorized business without a permit out of the residence halls. That's more a policy clarification meeting because we need to make sure we're understanding each other. But our area coordinators know if for any of those things I just said for policy clarification letter, they'd like to do a meeting with the student, they can totally do that. They are the expert in their community. If they have time to do a meeting, the meeting's great. I think I also have a policy clarification letter for the first instance of overstaying your welcome and not moving out in time for December break. Because I've worked at numerous schools where I've been a new person and people have said, that student never moves out on time. And I'm like, really? Because it's not in Maxient. So what do we do with that? Like, because the options are like completely ignored or fully conducted. And what if there's an in-between? So I have a lot of support at my institution to try to be imaginative in this way. And of course, if they don't get it, if they weren't clarified, if they weren't educated, then the next one does go to a process, but we've tried this alternate resolution.
You fixed the reason that I hate those notices in several. First, it's affirming, like, you shut up when somebody said your music was disturbing them. And it provided an offer. Like, I'd be happy to meet with you about this. I was hoping to spare you some time, but I also realized by doing it only with a letter, I might be really missing something important that only you could tell me. So if you'd like to meet, let's do it.
That's very important, Colette, offering a meeting. I think that students and even newer professionals get caught up in is the meeting mandatory? And meetings are not always mandatory, but should always be available.
Yes. And I do, going back to your point about being a first year student, a mitigating factor. It might make you feel better. My new colleague was telling me, I love it. She has this calculus for how she comes up with kind of guidelines for sanctions. And how serious was it? How many times in a row have they done this? And I was like, the only thing I would add is class year. Like, sometimes I do have higher expectation of, when a senior says, I don't know how to cite properly compared to a first year student, that feels different to me.
Now, is that in a spreadsheet that you've done that, or?
I believe, Kurt, that you would be salivating over her Excel.
I think I need to see that.
Yes, I meant to mention that as well. I wanted to let you know, Kurt, that I felt really seen by you when I listened to the one episode because I learned that I'm not the only one who wishes they were married to Excel. I am married, by the way, but if I could be married to a human, but if I could be married to Excel, I might do it. And I just went to dinner with my vice president of student affairs from the institution I most recently left, and we were talking about the things we miss about each other and working together. And she said, I just think of all of your spreadsheets and how organized you were. And I'm like, yes, like I want to be described when I'm not in the room by my organization. That sounds great.
I think that that's going to be on my grave. Something about Excel, and I think we should get a hall pass. I'm also in a relationship, but if I wanted to, also marry Excel, I think that should be an option.
Little dabbling.
Yeah, in the Excel pond.
Yeah, yeah. And one more thing I just thought of when Colette was saying that class year could be a mitigating factor. I had started thinking about how to be on our hearing board here. You need to not be in your first year, whether freshman or transfer. And the reason is because if you're in your first year, you haven't fully been immersed in our expectations at the college and our culture. And I was thinking about if I like that or not. And then I said, well, I do because it's in the same way that I appreciate that a freshman can't be an RA. I think to a degree, you should go through some things to be able to do it. And I don't mean they needed to be a resident. I think a freshman could be a commuter and then switch to resident status. But this is just making me think further about, freshmen versus not freshmen.
Yeah. I also love this concept of, sometimes it can just be a letter because I do think there is a certain population of students that you can lose credibility as a professional if you bring them in to have a discussion about a candle, and then there's almost no difference between a candle versus something that actually is potentially serious and harmful to the community. So I like the idea of differentiating them in that way.
I love that because I think about approaches, like you just said, and then also sanctions. You need somewhere to go. So, we don't put people on
Right.
probation for the first candle violation because then what do we do if there's physical assault? But just the idea that there's a spectrum of choices always just feels very important as I hold up this book for our
I'm going to
listeners
need to
online.
get this book because all of my rainbow books are gay things. So I don't have a rainbow conduct book.
For people that are listening to the audio version of the podcast, Erin is holding up the Reframing Campus Conflict book.
And Kurt, I think I might have two copies. So when I go home today, I'll look. And if I do, I'll email you because, fun fact, scholarly listeners, if you didn't know, if you're sending a book to someone and you're deciding between FedEx, UPS, and USPS, you should go to USPS because if you tell them it's a book, media mail, half off.
Oh, I did not know that. Very cool.
So, Erin Kaplan, if I'm not mistaken, did you bring notes to this meeting?
I may have run notes. I wanted to be a really good student. I've listened to all of your episodes so far, and the hosts have been phenomenal. I think when you've been in the field for a long time, you kind of assume you know everyone. But I didn't know any of the hosts, and I loved what they said, and I took some notes and looked them up, and I thought, I got to be prepared to be able to answer these questions because they're so dynamic.
All right, bring it on. I'm dying to know. What's in your notebook?
I love notes. Yes.
Origin story, sanctions. Like,
Well, I'm
what you
prepared
got?
to answer the question of what my conduct origin story is, because I
Yeah.
heard you ask other
Awesome.
people that. So I joked earlier that I've been doing conduct since I came out of the womb, but I've really been doing it since I graduated college. But my origin story, is that I was a super student leader. I was really connected. I loved college. I learned what student affairs was as a function or a profession quite young. It was Halloween weekend of freshman year, which is really young. I remember in graduate school for my master's in student affairs, my professor said, raise your hand if you learned about student affairs after graduating. And the hands went up of the students who came back to school, career change.
Hmm.
And then he said seniors, juniors, sophomores, and realized I found out as a freshman. And I know it's unusual, but I was at a retreat through the student activities office, and I was sitting next to this guy who looked a little old to be a student, but what else could they be? And they're telling me about their job, and I said, "You get paid to help kids like me find like clubs to join. He was the director of student activities and still is. It's his birthday today. My first and most loyal mentor, Chris Lai, who's director of student activities at Western Michigan University, my alma mater. And he calls this my lollipop moment. If you're not familiar with the TED Talk called Lollipop Moments, very
No.
related to this podcast. Essentially, the way there's only one of you, so you don't know every student, but they all kind of know you. And,
Mm.
you know, you say hi back in the hall, even though you don't know who they are. But how they'll remember everything, but you won't because you want to, you care, but there's too many of them. So anyway, Chris Sly calls this my lollipop moment. He doesn't remember us meeting at the retreat, even though I'm in the picture of participants. But when he said that to me, when I said, "You get paid to talk to kids like me?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm going to go into student affairs." And he looked at me, this 18-year-old know-it-all, and said, "Talk to me in 4 years." And fortunately for me, maybe unfortunately for him, I ended up on the student government executive cabinet for every year of college, which meant Chris Sly was stuck doing one-on-ones with me every week of college, which became resume review and mock interview prep for graduate assistantships. And so anyway, then fast forward 4 years later, I'm ranking the graduate assistantships that I want to interview for on each campus at interview days. And I didn't really have conduct experience myself as like a student. Although I did have one conduct case freshman year that is a 30-second story that is very funny that I'll share if there's time. But anyway, because I'd been involved in so many things, I'm like ranking that I'd love to interview for an assistantship in student activities, Greek life, this, and that.
Mhm.
When reading about conduct, it was very interesting because it occurred to me that most of the leadership I had done had set me on this pathway to do student conduct, something I had not thought about at
Mm.
all, which was for my sorority, I was judicial board chair and risk management chair. So, you know, essentially having informal hearings and doing risk
Mhm.
education. And I found a lot of joy in that and was successful in sharing my message. So then I was the vice president of judicial and risk management for the Pan-Hellenic Council. And then I'm on the bylaws revision committee for Hillel. And then for student government was an associate justice. So I had done all of this peer-to-peer accountability, how do we treat each other, risk management, explanation of policies. Never knew it related to a job. I just liked it. So then I end up interviewing for the conduct assistantships at all the schools, and it was a really good fit, and I landed, and I never left. But when I got the offer to go to Rutgers and do my assistantship in student conduct, I remember there were student affairs folks at my alma mater who said to me, "This is not going to be a good fit. You are too rah-rah. You love student affairs. It's going to be too negative for you." And I feel like I'm similar to Colette in this way in that I said, "I'll show them." And I did. I've loved it. Student conduct is what you make of it. Colette always says she's
Yep.
witnessed magic at restorative circles. I witness magic every day in my one-on-one conversations with students. So that's how I
Wow.
I was destined for student affairs, but I fell into the student conduct part because I didn't fully know about that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great story.
Thank you.
I know reference checks sometimes would tell me like that school's a little concerned that you won't be able to make the hard decisions because you're too nice. And I had to rely on other people to back me up. Like you can be assertive and nice at the same time.
I think that's something that is one of those core tenets that you may not understand unless you're doing this work. And I think about it when I listen to this podcast. I imagine you were a great team working together because I think you really balance yourself out and you're really different. And even within ASCA, there's lots and lots and lots of types of people. There's not one way to do this work, but I think Colette's point is really good. Everyone has bias and everyone has, you know, populations that their heart might, you know, be a little softer for and all these kinds of things, and knowing that that doesn't rule you out from doing the work, but it also doesn't rule you out or excuse you from consulting with others. In grad school, in my
Mm.
assistantship, I was working with some folks in the Dean of Students office in case management, and they kept saying consultation is key. And as I think about my 13 years doing this work, whether it was internally, externally, or both, how would I have done all these things I did without consulting? Like, what if I didn't have people? I can't even imagine for me and my students.
Well, a colleague and I were talking this week. It was actually the very first woman she hired me to be an orientation counselor. when I was a sophomore in college.
I
And
love a good reconnect. I
we're
do those
still
too.
involved, and she actually had some misconduct that she, in 40 years of knowing her, it's the first time I heard these stories because of the podcast. She had listened to it, and now I've forgotten completely my train of thought of what.
Reference checks and what people say about the type of person you are in consulting.
Yeah, I might have to just edit this out. Doggone it. What are we talking about? Uh, well, it'll come back to me right when you're probably in the middle of a story, Erin, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Uh, you are the only person I know who truly like lights up when you talk about working on your dissertation. You don't talk about it like it's drudgery. You talk about it like it's fun and it's curiosity driven. So, what are you allowed to tell us in 1 minute of
Yeah.
what you're working on behind the scenes?
Can I spend 1 minute introducing the topic and 1 minute discussing what I'm working on
Yeah.
behind the scenes? So it always has shocked me that so many people on the inside may still regard student conduct as negative because what I love about student conduct is a student is mandated to come and talk to you, but they're not mandated to leave with a connection. They may, and that's awesome, but I've seen that so many times. And like you too, I'm sure, I've had so many students on so many campuses where we met through conduct. We didn't fall in love right away. It may have been contentious. They may have been mad at me. They might have written something not so kind in a sanction essay. But my response to that is Colette and I both talked a lot about leaning in and saying, like, I know this has been a really difficult process. If you ever decide you want to use me as a resource, I'm here. You know where my office is. And so many students throughout the years at different schools have been, oh, you're not mad at me. You don't hate me. You don't think I'm a bad kid. And I think about how you two talked about shame on the one podcast, but it's like this incident meant more to you than it did to me. I just do this all day. Don't think about it in the way you do. But I have built some really strong relationships through the conduct process with students. I have an email address from 3 schools ago just for the students I talked to from that school. So I have always felt like student conduct leads to retention and sense of belonging. And I've talked about this for many years and presented about this and written about this, but there was no data. And you might be surprised to learn all the high impact practices that have been studied within higher ed and student affairs, living in the residence halls, going abroad, living learning community. Student conduct has not been studied in a way to examine, like, should it be a high impact practice? Is it positive? What positive outcomes does it have? So the topic really chose me. So I'm exploring the connection between student conduct and sense of belonging by interviewing students who went through the conduct process at schools that were not my own.
That's fantastic. I love that
Mm-hmm.
topic.
Thank you. And not to be totally nerdy, but I just finished my 17th interview, and interviewing these students has been potentially the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. I was on the phone with a friend from college last night, and I said, I always thought no experience could rival back when I was student body president, but interviewing these 17 students, if you all think it's intimate and there's vulnerability to be in these moments with students, when they're not your own students and they're thinking back and they're talking about the hearing officer, and in my case, they all know that I know their hearing officer because that's how they were referred to me with eligibility
Yeah.
of the study. It has been such an honor and such a privilege, and there's themes, but each of the 17 students has been very individual. I've been very touched. I've spoken to 4 or 5 about student affairs, and I guess the behind the scenes teaser I'll give you ahead of my spring defense, which is TBD date, is a lot of students became involved with the conduct process afterwards. And some of those students, most of them, 3, are really able to vocalize that is because of the experience. I see the value in the experience. I came in kind of lost and I was found, and then I was compelled to be on the hearing board or be a peer advocate or be the student conduct intern. And then there were a couple who now do things like peer advisor and hearing board, but they say that it is just something to do and that it's not because they were moved by the process. And that is their story. But, we believe that any connection is good connection. So that has been very cool. A student who had really residential conduct, as we think of it, is now a thriving in RA. A student with a citation academic misconduct issue is now a peer academic helper.
Huh?
So that's been very, very cool behind the scenes. And I'll tell you, out of the 17 students, a very high number feels heard, feels listened to, feels like the process was educational, can vocalize what they got out of it. I think my favorite theme is what I'm calling the right person. So as they're talking about the person, whether positive or negative, I
Hmm.
remember to say, Kurt, Colette, how important is the person who's doing this kind of work? And an interview I coded last night, the student said, it's so important. For example, I was able to sit down with someone who really worked to see me for who I am and sought to understand who I am and why I did this. So that's been the coolest part, hearing them talk about how amazing the hearing officer is or what they wish was different. And 4 or 5 have called the hearing officer their mentor without me asking. That's not a question I
Very
ask.
cool.
So some things come out that you want to know about, and some things come out that you didn't expect to know about. And it's just been the coolest thing I've ever done.
Erin, I love to hear your excitement about your dissertation. I missed that process. I think I didn't necessarily always enjoy the classes I took in my doctoral program, but really getting to steep yourself in a topic that you're passionate about is just so exciting. And I miss being able to do that kind of work. So I can't wait to see your final product.
Thanks so much. I was thinking, because one of your guests talked about running into a student out in the wild, as I say, at the farmer's
Yes.
market and them thanking her. I have to share that I believe the primary reason that most of the 17 students spoke to me is because they got a $25 Amazon gift card. I want to be upfront and say that. But the amount of them who, at the end of their interviews or in follow-up text or emails, have said, thank you for doing this research and thank you for letting me tell my story, has been staggering because I don't work on their campus. They don't need to
Right.
suck up to me. And one student who had a really negative experience and was emotional on the interview and everything, I said, other than the $25, why did you agree to talk to me today? This is so fresh and so painful. She just returned from suspension. And she said, I had a really negative experience and I don't want anyone else to. And I said,
Hmm.
wow.
Isn't that what we hear in RA interviews too? Like, why do you want to be an
Yeah.
RA? I had the best RA in the world and they brought us together and built a community, or my RA never got to know me. They were terrible, they were mean.
So much assessment on, living in community and living in residence halls, and like we all are lifelong learners and believe in learning from everything. But then I say there's this deficit. We haven't done a good job of telling the student conduct story and how there are outcomes anecdotally on retention and sense of belonging. And if we all believe in learning from everything, we'll evaluate these things and elevate the stories of students and professionals in these really vulnerable moments.
Hmm.
We are running short on time, but I already have topics, Erin, that I want you to come back and talk to us about. Right before you hopped on, I'm going to go back to the hall pass. Kurt and I were talking about our spouses and sometimes things they think about our jobs and they worry about our safety, and how our partners think about our work and expectations. And I remembered what Sarita told me. You were talking about people in one-person offices who don't have somebody to consult with.
Hmm.
For her, it's ChatGPT. And you have seen the new sanction I'm creating using chat as a mentor and as a
Yes, I
facilitator.
have. Kurt,
And
I am a little skeptical of AI, which I hope I don't get canceled for saying that, but Colette has shown me, like, hand in hand with me, patiently walked with me, gently motivationally interviewed me. Well, what do you think about this? Are you opposed to this? Because in this way, I checked in with the student before and after to make sure they're okay. And I'm like, all right, Colette, you're really moving me in that direction.
I've been starting to get their reflections back, and all but one of them actually shared their whole transcript of their conversation with the chat. And the chat asked one of them, like, hey, do you have a hearing coming up or something like that on your campus? And the student said, no, I already finished my support meeting. And that was, she was talking about her conduct meeting and she called it a support meeting. And the
That's so
chat
cool.
asked, is there anything else that you need? And she said, no, the support person was really thorough. And I think there would be people insulted by that they weren't called like a hearing officer, but it was so great.
No, that's great. I have a question for you both, but before I forget, I just sent an outcome letter with, I'll call it hefty sanctions. I mean, the student has to do three things, and I want them to know I'm not trying to torture them. I'm trying to help them. So, as often as I can, I probably don't do this 100% of the time, but as often as I can, I write in the outcome, this sanction is to help you get connected to resources. This sanction is to help you build confidence in citation practices, whatever it is, because I really want them to know I'm not torturing them. And three is a lot, but the student had a big incident. So, anyway, when writing the letter at the end, status sanction was reprimand. And then below that, it could say educational sanction. I ended up writing supportive sanction, parentheses, educational sanctions, because I really want them to read it and see it as supportive. I don't know if that's something we'll start doing here. I just did it for one student, but it makes me want to ask the two of you. And the way earlier you asked me about like Deanly moment, educational dialogue. If your supervisors would just say sure yes and it was whatever you wanted, what would the two of you call hearings? Like what is the actual word that represents what you're doing in that?
Colette, I'm going to defer to you first.
We tried and tried at my last school. We had got 50 different iterations, but in the end, I feel like it's a meeting. I don't like the
I
adjective.
I really liked your policy clarification meeting, but that does it feels too clinical. Like I guess for me, if I was gonna have it be whatever it was, it would if it was appropriate, it would feel more casual. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yep. Just community standards meeting.
Yeah.
But anything, I was telling a friend yesterday, we have this thing called educational conversation, and I'm like, ick. Who am I? Like, they get to decide if it's educational or not, not me. I do
Such
my
a good
best,
point.
but they get to decide the adjective that they put on it.
This
What
is
if we
such a
just
good
call it
point.
free coffee? Then they are guaranteed to come, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
$25 Amazon gift card meeting. And Erin, I don't believe that it was the gift card that was the motivator. I think it was that someone noticed them and thought that they had something valuable and insightful
Hmm.
to share, and they were going to get a gift card. Money doesn't motivate people. I don't think anyway. I think it was that you were offering a chance to be heard.
I'm wondering if Colette's right there because a couple of them, more than a couple, have texted or emailed me and said, I've been thinking about this. Am I allowed to know what happens with it? Am I allowed to see your final project? I'm so appreciative you let me tell my story. Like, kind of like how at the end of hearings, sometimes students say, like, this was therapeutic. It was like a counseling appointment. Some of them had not talked about their incident since the hearing. And for students, it could have been as many as 2 years ago because they had to have went through the process freshman or sophomore year, and now they're a junior, senior. So if you just had it in the spring of sophomore year and now you're a new junior, it was a few months ago, but for some of them it had been 2 years. So I wonder if you're onto something, Kala, because everyone at their core, doesn't everyone just want to be heard and understood?
Yeah,
I think so.
it reminds me the old days of nobody'll come if we don't have pizza. Pizza's the only reason people come. Like, then you're doing crappy programming. Our budgets are going to be cut. Does that mean we have lost all of our imagination or creativity?
This is very full circle because when you came to my presentation in 2020 called Educational Programming at Small Schools with Limited Resources, I realize now that's not an imaginative title, but it's the truth.
It's very descriptive, though.
Well, what I talked about was the title of the presentation was that, but the actual concept is tabling during lunch. And it's how, if you're at a small school and you say, I don't have a staff, I don't have money, I don't have promos, table during lunch, table in the entry point of the residence hall, dining hall. They don't need food because they're coming in to get food, or maybe have a bag of candy, but ask students what they think, hazing prevention, know the code. Honestly, Colette, I have worked at schools where I had to challenge the notion about pizza, not because I had strong philosophical convictions about it, but just because of budget issues. But it's made me a better professional because if you can do this work without money, then
Hmm.
to be at a well-resourced institution while I'm at now, it's just a real privilege and a real gift and not something I take for granted.
Love is free, I used to tell the RAs. Like, we can give you a little bit of money for some candy, but love is free. There's the sound bite for you for today.
I miss those sandwich cookies. We used to call them the program cookies, like the generic Oreos, but they were vanilla
Do
or
you remember?
chocolate.
Remember for some events that I'd be like, you better buy
Cookie
the
king.
name brand cookies. Don't come back with those crap cookies because we got to draw the quality candidates.
Better
I'm
bring the
totally.
double stuff Oreos.
Well, I have not to get too political, but do you all think the name brand's Oreos taste as good as the Oreos? Can you tell?
The new generics, Wegmans makes a fine knockoff Oreo. Those would be very acceptable and on budget.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I think there were some good knockoffs.
Erin Kaplan, we are so thrilled that we have had you. We Heart Educational Outcomes.
So for the listeners watching on YouTube,
Listeners, if you love Erin, and we know that you do, give us a like, a follow, give us some comment love, and tune in for the next Misbehavior. Erin, thanks a ton for being with us. We
Thank
definitely
you,
want you
Aaron.
back.
thank you for the opportunity. This podcast series you've started has just been fantastic.
So fun. See you next time.
Bye.
Misbehavior is written and produced by Colette Shaw and Kurt Doan. Theme music was written and performed by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. You can contact Ms. Behavior at msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com. That's msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com.